Hello coaches and welcome to this edition of Give and Go Live. My name's David Newbury and I'm joined as always by my colleague Ian Barker. Hello Ian.
Hello David, pleasure to be here.
So Ian, last time we were together we talked about the back four formations and a couple of different options. Today we're going to look at the rationale of why we might want to play with a back four. And just as a recap, last time when we spoke, we talked about the numbering system. The numbering system is used in the modern game to demonstrate to players a knowledge of different functions of players and different roles that they play in the team. This is something that is quite common, but it's also very specific to a particular type of strategy that the coach might employ. In this example, we play four across the back, and we have two central defensive midfield players that use the numbers 6. And then we play with a wide left, a wide right, and an attacking central or withdrawn striker with one player up top. So those are what the numbers represent. We talked about there being two types of possible formations. The first is a flat back four with the 4 players, the number 2 and number 3, the fullbacks, with 2 central defenders, almost playing in one line to cover the width of the field without much depth or height to that back four. And then the second option we looked at was that of a more compact diamond-shaped defense with 2 central defenders, the number 4 and 5, and the fullbacks playing very narrow, the width of the penalty area, leaving room out on the wings for the 2 wide midfield players. So Ian, let's talk now about some of the rationale of why this makes sense. And we are, for consistency, breaking them into 3 categories: that of personnel, defensive strategy, and attacking strategy.
Yeah, thank you, David. So some really good bullets here on the left, considerations for the personnel and how you might use them. But a couple of thoughts here is that typically in the modern game now, our centre backs are incredibly what you might call, for want of a better expression, honest players. They stay at home. Their primary function is to defend their goal and protect the goalkeeper, obviously. And in the modern game, more often than not, these are now physically strong players, quite mobile. You have to be quite mobile. Technically, you probably have to play with your feet a little bit more than you did in previous eras of the game. And certainly defensive heading, as shown here in our illustration, is a function of a U13 up player. And so it's a skill. Defensive heading is a different skill than attacking or offensive heading. So certainly considerations there. But it isn't always necessarily the biggest, fastest kid is the centre-back, because there are examples, notably from one of the more recent World Cups, a guy called Fabio Cannavaro for Italy, who was 5'0", but his timing, his reading of the game was exceptional, and he was a very dogged tackler too. So you don't have to be 6'4" to be a centre-back in the modern game, although some real physical presence helps. Other quick considerations would be, if our wide defenders are players that can be occasionally left on their own in wide spaces and offensively are expected to get forward, there can be an incredible work rate put on the fullbacks in terms of endurance, and then pace to get into the attack and certainly recover to defense could be a feature of a fullback. So these types of considerations inform us as we place players on the field and begin to determine our formation and how that becomes a system.
Ian, we looked at the differences between the flat back four and the diamond-shaped back four, and we used the numbers 4 and 5 in both those systems, but very different in terms of functionality. Can you just talk a little bit about why a 5 and a 4 might be different on a flat back four as opposed to a diamond?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in this picture here, where we've kind of got this what I would consider zonal or relatively flat back four, pretty much the difference between 4 and 5 would be ideally that number 4 is right-footed and number 5 is left-footed. That would give you great balance. But they have very similar functions, and they essentially defend to the left or the right of each other. There will be occasions, however, where you determine that your number 5 is a player of perhaps limited tactical ability, but is a great man marker. So you say to the number 5, your job is to snuff out the opponent. And then you say to number 4, your job is more of a sweeper, and you are providing cover across the field for 2, 3, and 5. And the number 4 in this case, this player playing more as this sweeper role, they're going to have to be an intelligent player. They're probably going to have to be able to play with their feet because they become a free player in possession. And so what you're saying if you're playing with a diamond is that you're really determining very significant physical, technical, and tactical differences between 4 and 5, which would mean that you stack them up on top of each other as opposed to play them side by side. So when I look at this slide, some really good content on the left there to consider. But certainly one of the features of a back 4 in a relatively zonal organization is how you defend centrally when you need to. So in this particular example, you can see we've pinched 3 and 2 in to make our team thicker in the center of defense. And then because we have, in this case, 4 or 5 guys in the midfield, we're asking 7 and 11 to do some work defensively in the wide space. And I think that's a very, very reasonable consideration, because now you're keeping your back 4 nice and compact, and they're in the types of places you want them. Another consideration, it's not diagrammed here, but if you follow the arrows, would be that 3 indeed can go out, and maybe it's one of the central midfielders that drops in to kind of a defensive central midfield role. So you keep 3 players centrally, 4, 5, and 6, and that allows 3 to go out if you want them to. And of course, on the other side, 2 can go out, but then one of the midfielders drops. So there's a number of different ways that you can defend centrally and wide at the same time with this flat zonal back 4. The key is that you determine to your players when the ball goes out wide, to the best of our ability, we want 3 and 2 to go, or we want 11 and 7 to go. When the ball is coming centrally, we want 6 or 8 to drop in, or we want 3 and 2 to compact. So again, it's horses for courses, but there is flexibility in this formation as it becomes a system.
And Ian, we see here with the number 5, certainly, and number 4, a man marking situation one-on-one, but the number 3 and number 2 seem to look like they are marking a zone or covering a zone. Is it possible that we could do both at the same time?
Yeah, I think this is actually interesting. So you essentially, what it looks like, you've got 4 marking 2. But to your point, 3 has the ability to go and cover with 11, but he is also, or she is also, has the potential to deny the pass into the opponent. So they're actually performing quite an interesting role there. They're in a space. They're not marking anybody in this particular instance, but they have the ability to cover, to deny a pass in, and of course they can always go pressure should the ball get to this player. So there's quite a lot of sophistication there. In the case of the number 2 in this picture, should the ball be played all the way over the top, the number 2 has the ability to be that last defender, retrieve the ball, and potentially predicate our attack. So they're not just standing around doing nothing. They're actually in particularly specific logical spaces performing a number of potential functions depending on how the opponent attacks.
And let's now look at the final part of this presentation, the attacking strategy.
Yeah, again, great bullets on the left. I'm going to just focus on the one in blue. But we play with a back 4, and we're going to play with maybe 3 in the midfield and 3 up top, or 4 in the midfield and 2 up top. So there's going to be different orientations. 7 and 11 could be very high players, or they could be midfielders. They could be attacking forwards or midfielders. But in the modern game, it's certainly the case now that the 2 and the 3s, whilst their primary job should be defending, there are examples of players. Marcelo from Real Madrid in Brazil is one, who is as much an attacker when his team has the ball as he is a defender when his team doesn't have it. And so our goalkeepers are seeking to distribute out through 2 and 3. So we have a really good assurance of maintaining possession as opposed to punting the ball. And if pressure comes up onto our number 2 in this case, then our goalkeeper should have the technical range by throw or by kick to maybe intentionally get the ball to 7. So width, as we've defended and we've got good coverage across the field in terms of width, but we now have players in great positions should we win the ball to mushroom out into an offensive stature or posture, excuse me. And so this is critical in the modern game. And the higher levels we can watch on television, be it MLS, English Premier League, Bundesliga, etc., NWSL, you'll see that fullbacks are a primary function of an effective attacking team.
So Ian, final question for you. We presented two different options, a flat back four and a diamond back four. If you were to identify one main reason why you would play one or other of those systems as an attacking process, what would be that reason for you?
I would certainly try to play them as what we might consider a zonal or a flat back four. Because then all four of the players, certainly the two fullbacks, are empowered to get forward because everybody has the ability to defend and everybody has the technical and tactical ability to play in possession. The challenge with the diamond is you end up with quite one-dimensional players. And so, for example, if you have a number 5 man marker whose job it is to simply prevent one player scoring and your team has possession, they're not really then equipped or mentally inclined to participate in the attack. So from my personal preferences, and certainly the modern game is at this point, players who can switch on from in possession to out of possession, back and forth, and all 11 players can do that in some capacity is the ideal.
Well, thank you, Ian, for your time again today. And that wraps up our review of the back four, and our next presentations will be looking at the back three and then the back five. So thanks very much, Ian.
You're welcome, David. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, coaches, for joining us on this edition of Give and Go Live.